The Search Podcast USA Edition series is sponsored by Ascen. Ascen is a top employer of record in North America that exclusively helps staffing and recruitment agencies hire contractors compliantly throughout the US and Canada. Ascen's all-in-one white-label platform handles onboarding, timesheets, payroll, benefits, insurance, invoicing, and optional financing so you can grow quickly in the US and Canada. Start growing your staffing agency in the US today with Ascen. Visit us at ascen.com.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Search Podcast. I'm Elliott Manning. I'm the Managing Director of Payment Recruitment across the UK, USA, and SA. I have an announcement to make that we have a brand new sponsor for the Search Podcast. After a few years with our previous sponsor, we have moved to a brand new partnership, which I'm very excited about, working with a fantastic business who offer EOR services across North America. I won't tell you too much more about what they do because it's probably best to hear it from the CEO, Francis Larson, who has joined me on this. Francis, I'll let you take away an introduction, mate.
Great. Well, thank you, Elliott. So I'm Francis Larson. I'm CEO and founder of Ascen. Ascen is a Y Combinator-backed employer of record for staffing companies. We work exclusively with staffing organizations, helping them scale across the US. We become the employer of the workers. We handle payroll, onboarding, timesheets, invoicing, funding if they need it, and all sorts of other things on a white label platform. And we're super excited to sponsor the podcast.
Awesome. Well, look, let's talk about the main subject matter in this instance is the US and what's going on over there. I've seen a huge, and I say this like I feel like every year, but I've seen a huge influx of recruitment businesses setting up over in the US. And what I've noticed this year in particular is where the UK market has not been the most favorable, let's call it, for a lot of recruitment companies. There's been a huge kind of change of direction with more and more businesses trying to get themselves over to the US. I don't see it slowing down. If anything, this year I've actually seen it get busier and busier. But I'd be interested to know how you see things and what your take is on it, Francis.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the market is so much easier in the US, at least right now. Maybe historically it wasn't like that, but the recruitment companies, every second person is a recruiter in the UK. Like there's so many recruiters, it's thousands and thousands. And I think it was like something like 30,000 was the last count. And it's pretty easy to count this because of how public the data is in the UK. So there's just so many active recruiting firms. They're really small. They're low barriers to entry. So the margins are pressed down, and the tactics that people have to do to be really competitive in the UK are just astonishing. People have to be incredibly good at sales. They have to be clever. They have to like price rock bottom. And then they have to work harder than they have in their entire lives just to be a functioning firm, forget growing your firm. So like you take that competitive atmosphere and then, they speak English, they do really well in the US, and the time zone is like pretty favorable, especially like, Texas and eastward. And we get these firms, they feel like, I can do a better margin. My markups are going to be a lot higher. So we're talking like 50, 60% markups for temporary work. Perm work, the salaries are a lot higher. So we're talking a lot larger fees. So, a developer in London, a software developer might be making like $80,000. And there was a Wall Street Journal article about this the other day, and from Robert Halfdata, software engineer making probably 75,000 in London, $75,000 is making almost double that in most of the US outside of the rural areas. So like the salaries are a lot higher. There's fewer staffing firms. There's only about 20,000 staffing firms in the US. And the markups are higher. And just overall, like the recruitment industry is viewed differently. And so UK recruitment firms just do really, really well. Some of the biggest US firms are actually UK based. And there's a reason for that. They cut their teeth, so to speak, in an incredibly challenging market, and they do well in the US.
Yeah. The thing is that when you look at the US, look, I mean, they always say the same thing, and I've said this throughout the podcast, and anyone I speak to generally anyway, that the opportunity is generally huge. And I've seen so many recruitment companies going over there that they still have spoiled for choice, right? And they generally have more opportunities than they can imagine. And the contractor market of in the recruitment world was never that big in the US. It was mainly the large corporations that were doing contract recruitment over in the States. However, over the last 2 years, maybe the last 18 months, the contract side of recruitment for expat businesses has grown incredibly. And it's allowed recruitment businesses, in my opinion, especially in London, and I know this actually for a fact, not an opinion, that's allowed them to survive. To survive because they're making enormous fees and huge income that's two, three times what they would see in the UK. That's basically boosted their revenue and allowed them to keep going. Now they're trying to now physically get themselves over to the States to make themselves a lot bigger and present more opportunity. Is there any trends that you're seeing in the market in the US with maybe let's talk about like geographical locations and where people are going? Because there was so much hype around Austin and it still is a great place to be, but then the hype's moved over to Tampa where people are now moving their businesses over to set up in Florida, and Charlotte's gone quiet and Atlanta's more, US centric focused. It's like, where are you seeing the geographical trends at the minute?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to say is the best firms we see are the ones that do have a footprint in the US.
Yeah.
So they might start like fully in the UK, have nobody on the ground in the US. You can do pretty well like that. I think you can get up to like, you can do a lot of perm business, but I think you can get to, a few million in sales pretty easily from the UK, maybe like 5 million ish. Like if you're talking about perm as well, top line. But the best folks, the best recruiters do well by having somebody on the ground. Usually it's sales. Usually it's like people who can talk to the clients, and they usually focus on a geographic area, like. So like we've seen, like you said, there's a lot of folks in Boston. We're seeing a lot more in Florida, less so Miami. Not so much Miami. We don't see that as much. We see people like base their company in Miami, but they're like physically somewhere else. They'll be like a cheaper area. Like you just don't want to be spending if you're like new in the States. You don't want to be having to pay Miami salaries. It's like going to New York in a way to pay in Miami. So we see more Tampa. We see a little bit in like some other southern type states, like we have Virginia. We see a little bit. So we do see Charlotte still, even though it's like more quiet than it was. Atlanta, not so much. We do see a lot of people going to New York and LA. So New York and LA, I think there's a like more of a vanity reason for that. I think they have more of a lifestyle reason that people want to be in New York and LA. New York is amazing though for at least in that tri-state area we see folks go. It's very, very good for just like doing client meetings. If you're in IT, it's really, really good because of the density of meetings you can do. Everywhere else in the country, like if you go to Chicago, we do see firms there going from the UK to Chicago. It's just you're going to be a little bit more limited by your industry. Like you might get tech, but it might be like purely financial services tech, or you might get tech, or it might be purely marketing tech. So I think some regions do better than others. And I think the overall thing in the United States that people have to get used to, which is a little bit different from the UK, is like a lot of your stuff is going to be remote anyways. Like you're going to be doing a lot of meetings over Zoom. It's good that you do some meetings, but it's so massive that even if you're in the same state, you can't pop over, drive 5 hours to meet somebody like you can in the UK, where like everyone's in London, for instance, and you could pop down to London for a day and it's no big deal. So there are some different realities you have to deal with the distance. Like even if you're in Austin, Dallas is like pretty far away. San Antonio is far away. You have to fly to get anywhere even if you're in Austin. So that's like a reality switch that we see with the recruiters coming over.
Yeah. No, and do you know what? And I don't know if you agree with this, and because of what I do in the rec to rec world, I've advised recruitment businesses that if they're going to go to the US, look, follow the market in terms of where your clients are based, because that's really helpful and makes a huge difference. But follow the talent of where you can grow your business, because ultimately, if you're in a location where there's not many competitors and there's not really many businesses that operate in the same market as you, from let's talk about recruitment companies like. I'll take Miami for instance, and I hope whoever's listening doesn't mind me saying this, but Miami's got is a great place to be in general, but it's very hard to get the expansion that your business needs from a recruitment company, because you're limited on talent. You're limited on junior talent as well in Miami as against kind of like Tampa. And you've got to look at those numbers, if you like. And I think that's kind of where firms are going wrong. That's why New York's always a hot spot. Austin's a hot spot. In Tampa, where there's multiple recruitment companies, is a hot spot, and it works. Do you see that is I suppose I'm going to keep using this word, as a trend at the moment that you're seeing from a talent perspective and firms opening up in the right places?
Yeah, the talent issue, like on the recruiter and sales side, that's a real issue. Like junior folks, you a recruiter, you're not going to pay them more than like 60 grand. Like the reality is it's like pretty low paid, the junior folks.
Yeah.
So they can't survive on that in a major metro area that's expensive.
Nah.
It's very difficult. You could get a senior salesperson surviving like pretty well in those areas, but like if it's a junior person, if you're trying to build a physical office, I really don't like, this is my opinion, I just don't think you can get a lot of high quality folks earning like 50 grand and living in Miami. You really can't survive like that. You can do it in Tampa. You can do it in a lot of other places in Florida. You can do it in like,
in Texas.
Texas, you can do it. Impossible. Like maybe not impossible, very difficult in Miami, difficult in Boston where I'm at, difficult in New York, and, forget about San Francisco and LA and Seattle. It just doesn't work.
Well, considering the minimum wage in New York is something like it's gone up to like $55,000 minimum wage or something like that. I can't remember.
For overtime exemption.
Right.
It's basically really, really high, to be exempt for overtime.
But, recruiters, juniors can earn more working within other industries than they can in recruitment if a firm's offering them $45,000. And they're not going to look at the fact that in every case an OTE is an option. Because they need to afford to live for the first few months, and that's not possible. So yeah, you're completely right that certain locations doesn't allow for that. But let's talk about your business, a bit more in terms of what you guys offer, how you're helping recruitment companies. You've got an awesome platform. So tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so we work with recruitment agencies of all different types. A lot of our customers, we started out, we're working with folks in the U.S. So like startup agencies, mid-size agencies that didn't want to be an employer across the United States. So that's where like our core started. We work with platforms as well. So like staffing gig platforms, temporary staffing platforms. So these are larger, well-funded organizations that for whatever reason don't want to be an employer in a lot of states. And then increasingly in the last few years, it's been a ton of UK staffing firms, recruitment agencies coming over to the US. And the reality is that they probably could do okay if they were just working in like really one state and only recruiting workers. But now so many of the workers are remote. They're operating, their clients are all over the place. Even if they set up shop in Charlotte and they only do banking, they might have workers in 5 other states. And dealing with the complexity is like really difficult. So Ascen, we step in, we become the employer of record. We like advise on all the HR issues. We handle all the HR issues. Like if, you get sued for an EEOC claim, which is like discrimination or harassment or something like that, we step in to take care of that. So, the U.S. is extremely litigious, and there are a lot of issues that come up with being a large employer. So we step in and handle that. We shield you from that. When folks are dealing with, overtime issues and payroll issues, registration, which are very onerous in the U.S., insurance, we handle all of that. And that's because we're the employer. So that's really cool. That's like the core of what we do. And then on the other side of it, we offer payroll funding. So like a lot of agencies, they're coming from the UK. They might have an invoicing discounting facility or a lender in the UK that doesn't really work with US clients really well, or might have really low credit limits. So we'll provide funding in the case they need it. Not everyone chooses that, but for the folks that do, we do provide it. And then we have a white label platform. So we put the staffing agency's brand on the platform, which is, it goes everywhere. We're totally in the background, even though we're on the legal fine print, like on the W-2s and on the I-9s and different legal documents, we're there in the fine print. Everything else is branded to the staffing agency. So emails, onboarding things, payroll, invoices, if they use our invoicing, all that stuff is branded. And so the staffing agencies love it. The clients feel that they're working with like a really great, well-oiled staffing machine. And we can handle like growth, like insane growth that you experience in the US without having to hire any back office people. So like we've had people from the UK and from Europe generally that have gone from 0 to $30 million in less than 24 months with zero back office people in
Wow.
the US, no back office people whatsoever going through us. So like there's a number of stories, like not there's like a few that's a very extreme example, but we have lots of stories like that. People going from 0 to 10, 5 to 15, that kind of like situation where
Yeah.
people are doing really, really well. And so the whole goal of employer record for staffing is allow you to grow and not have to worry about all of this legal stuff, all of this payroll stuff that really has nothing to do with your ability to recruit and sell.
Yeah.
Those are two separate skills. And that's what we try to separate. Like, we will handle this part, the employer and the payroll and the legal side of your business, and you handle the sales and recruitment. Focus on that. Just get good at that. Don't worry about all this back office stuff. You still got to understand some basics, but you don't have to like dig into the details. So many people get bogged down by that.
I have a question and something that comes up a lot. And again, because I'm, in the space of talking to these guys and girls that are wanting to do this, what happens, and I hope this isn't a tricky question, like what happens if a company gets to like 15 employees in the US, they've got, 50 contract runners out, that you guys are supporting them with all of this stuff. And, what's stopping them from turning around and saying to you guys, look, are we not better off going to set up our own entity and doing it ourselves? What's the difference at what point do they get to that? And for you to start and say, well, why would you do that when you could utilize our services because, you're saving X, Y, and Z doing that?
Yeah. So there's a point that it becomes non-economical
Yeah.
to work with us. And that, like, you might have personal reasons or like stylistic reasons to work past that point, but it's like pure economic reasons. After a certain point, it doesn't make sense to work with us. We think that number is definitely 50 million in sales.
Yeah.
Definitely 50 million in sales. You don't need to work with us.
Yeah.
Unless you like have some stylistic or other legal reason you need to do it. So like that's one thing. Like maybe around 30 million, you think like, okay, like we can take some of this in house. Like we can use another funding service. We can start like doing a little bit more of our own legal stuff. Like there are some reasons. And so, the reality is that we are somewhat of a transitory solution.
Yeah.
So it's not really like, you're going to do this for your entire lifetime. And that's really only for fast growing firms. If you're going to stay at 5 to 10 million and you're growing like at 20% a year, it just doesn't make sense to focus on these costs. Like if really your growth is what you should optimize for. So like, there's some reasons you might want to take it in-house earlier, but realistically, you have to reach a threshold of sales to justify the fixed cost of having like an HR person and like a payroll person and like another operations person and maybe a compliance like expense. And all of those those are fixed costs. So until you reach that point, which we think is probably like, it's like around 30-ish million in sales. Before that, it just doesn't make sense. We do provide an off-ramp. So like people that if they want to take it in-house, they can just use our same software and just run payroll under their own EIN. Yeah. And we have different models there. So like they can take everything off of our plate and they put it on their plate, or they can do like partial stuff where we're still doing something. They can take out the funding, they can take out some tax stuff, they could leave some HR stuff. So there's lots of ways to go a la carte, which is pretty cool, which is, I think like we're probably the only EOR in the staffing focused space that allows you to do that. There's some like other big time EORs that allow that who are more client focused. But yeah, like it's a temporary solution. It's a solution for you to get there. And then once you're big enough, you can worry about, like shaving off savings.
Yeah. Am I right in saying that, like, because you have to pay tax and there's all this sort of stuff when you start bringing it all in house and, you've got all these kind of things to be mindful of against your outgoings and your bottom line, right? So ultimately, does it, and I might be kind of just, hopefully it's making sense here. If someone is hiring them all through you guys, which makes sense to me to utilize this service, they're going to be cost paying you guys a certain fee to utilize your, what you offer, which in essence, if they had them in house, they're gonna have to be paying tax on them and other costs on them in that respect anyway. But with you guys, they don't have to worry about that. They just pay your fee. You guys deal with everything, and it's kind of like it works hand in hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no. So you always have payroll burden. So like you're always gonna have to pay whether you're working with somebody like us or not. Like you're always gonna have to pay FICA, which is it's a tax for Medicare and for Social Security, which is 7.65%. You're always gonna have to pay state unemployment insurance, which is like around 3% depending on the state. FUTA, which is federal unemployment insurance, workers' comp, other types of insurance. So there's a bunch of things you're always going to have to pay
And
for.
a payroll fee on top of that.
Yeah, payroll fees, software fees, all that stuff you're going to have to pay for. And you're going to have some insurance that's not related to payroll. So there's no percentage per se, but like general liability, professional liability. There's all these things that you're going to have. Whereas if you use somebody like us, all that stuff is embedded. So like all of those burdens are there. All the insurances, like, in addition to workers' comp, you're also getting through us, you're getting like general liability, you're getting professional liability, you're getting a bunch of other things. That's all embedded. But like there's a trade-off, right? So like, there's a certain point where you're like, okay, I can get a better deal on insurance. Like, okay, I can get, I can go hire a certain admin back office team. I can do it myself. So there's definitely a trade-off, but like for most firms, they're just not at the scale where all these, like, we get a better deal on our insurance. Like we have like much larger limits than they could possibly get. Clients in the US, clients want insane insurance limits. And like, if you're a young firm, do you really want to spend like $100,000 on insurance, when you have one placement? Like, it's crazy. It's like, it just doesn't make any sense. But if you're doing 30 million sales, it does make a lot of sense. So like there's a reality of you're always going to pay certain things. And then the question is, do you want to pay the additional admin that you get through an EOR? So whether you're working with somebody like us or not, like the point is that you're always going to have to cover this stuff. But when you're working with an EOR, there's administration fees, which is like how we make our money.
Awesome. What's on the agenda for you in 2025, Francis? What's the plan for the business?
So I think the election, I like, this is a sensitive topic, I guess, but like I think that there's going to be a lot of change in the industry. I think that the states are going to react in a certain way, potentially increasing compliance. I think federally compliance is going to go down in the United States. So, I'm looking at it from like a very biased, like a compliance point of view. So I think in the US, like federally, there's going to be like a lowering of restrictions, but then states, in like the certain states that like are coastal, and like those are like California, Oregon, Massachusetts, Washington, Illinois, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, those types of states are going to increase their regulations. So like weird registrations, training requirements, overtime requirements, like certain things, I think they'll like continue, like classification enforcement for C2C, independent contractor classification. I think the state enforcement is going to go up, the federal enforcement is going to go down. I think the business environment is going to be very good. So I think that like everybody I talk to right now, it doesn't matter like who they are, everyone is very bullish on the US economy. It's like almost probably bubbly status. It's like there's too much money going into the US. It's like too hot. It's too good. I don't think this can last on forever. I think that it's not done running though. I think it's probably like, my guess is that, the United States it's going to run really hot for the next like 6 months. Maybe it crashes down earlier than that, but I think you're going to get a lot of a turnaround in the staffing. Like the last couple of years was like really tough for staffing firms. It was really, really hard. IT did poorly. Light industrial has done terribly. Healthcare has been like also really bad. Every industry except for a few hotspots has been really hit. Whereas I think right now, like the overall sort of ebullient economy is going to lift a lot of staffing. But I think a lot of things are changing. Like we think that a lot of the low end, like commercial staffing is going to get like platformatized, so to speak. It's all going to platforms, apps, and stuff like that. Whereas the niche firms, only the small firms are working in like pretty specific niches. So they're like really specific IT, really specific life sciences, really well like that sort of middle class of staffing firms, that like 10, like sort of, $20 to $50 million staffing firms that are just generalists. I think those guys are getting really, really, really squeezed. I think it's really going to be the platforms and then the niche firms. That's where we see it going.
Amazing. Fun. Francis, well, look, want to wrap it up here. We've got lots more that we'll talk about, in another podcast. Absolutely. We'll connect in 2025 and see where things are at. And if you're right in what you're saying as well, that'd be interesting to find out. But no, look, there's some really interesting information here. I think what you guys are doing is fantastic. Your platform's awesome. Great feedback in the market as well. Looking forward to seeing what you guys do with the staffing industry and, with this podcast. If anyone out there is, wanting to learn and know a little bit more about how to operate their business in the States, in a way that it makes sense financially and, operationally, then definitely talk to these guys at Ascen, and Francis will give you more information. We'll put all of the links and information that you guys want on each podcast that's going out on all platforms. And, stay tuned. There's a couple of these episodes that are going out every month, with loads of snippets throughout the month as well across all social media. But Francis, thank you very much for jumping on this with me. I look forward to working with you, dude, and I think what you're doing is awesome.
Great. Thank you.